Good evening, my name is Cassandra Lopez and I'll be presenting my survey results on teacher personality and burnout. What was the purpose of this survey? The Teacher Personality and Burnout Survey was designed to examine the relationship between a teacher's personality and his or her likelihood of experiencing symptoms of burnout. The survey assessed 4 domains: teacher personality, adaptation and awareness, school day routine, and teacher inner life. How were survey participants selected? Survey participants were recruited using a convenient sampling technique. A link to the online survey was posted to Facebook for teachers to access. Teachers were also able to share the link with colleagues. A total of 59 teachers responded to the survey. Who participated in the survey? Survey respondents were primarily female. In addition, survey respondents fell into 2 primary age brackets: 20 to 29 years old, 40 to 49 years old. In terms of teaching experience, the 3 largest groups were those who have been teaching from 16 to 20 years, those who have been teaching for 6 to 10, and those who have been teaching for 1 to 5 years. The majority of survey respondents were in teaching as their first career. 9 participants were in teaching as a second career. 75% of survey respondents would choose a teaching career again. 25% of survey respondents, however, would not choose a teaching career again. 4 of those who would not choose teaching again came into teaching as a second career. Of those 4, 2 have been teaching for less than 1 year. Individuals who have been teaching for longer than 10 years were also more likely to state that they would not choose teaching again. Teachers surveyed fell into 2 main grade areas: elementary and high school. They were also representative across all content areas, with elementary and language arts being the largest. The first domain the survey assessed was teacher personality. Interestingly, the survey respondents were an even mix of introverts and extroverts. The majority of survey respondents did not know their Myers-Briggs type indicator. Domain 2 covered topics of adaptability and awareness. Question 19, I can adapt my personality to accommodate different settings. The average survey response was agree. Question 20, I can adapt my communication style to the personality needs of my audience. The average survey response was agree. 21, I am aware of how my personality impacts my perceptions. The average survey response was agree. Question 22, I am aware of how my personality impacts my relationships. The average survey response was agree. Disaggregated by introverts versus extroverts, the results are very similar. So what can we conclude from this data? 91.5% of teachers reported being able to accommodate different settings. 89.8% of teachers reported being able to adapt their communication style to the personality needs of their audiences. 94.9% of teachers reported being aware of how their personalities shape their perceptions. 91.5% of teachers reported being aware of how their personalities impact their relationships. The third domain was school day routine. Question 23 asked respondents to agree or disagree with the statement of, I spend my lunchtime by myself in my classroom. The average survey response was rarely. Question 24, I share new ideas with my colleagues. The average survey response was sometimes. And question 25, I work past contracted hours. The average response was sometimes. Disaggregated by introverts versus extroverts, the results are similar. The next 3 questions in this domain. Question 26, I avoid student interaction after dismissal. The average response was never. Question 27, I feel supported by my school. The average response, sometimes. Question 28, my colleagues are caring. The average response was sometimes. disaggregated between introverts and extroverts, we have our first deviation with question 26. I avoid interaction after dismissal. Introverts rarely avoid student interaction after dismissal, while extroverts never avoid student interaction after dismissal, suggesting that the introverts might like to spend some time by themselves after dismissal. We can conclude from this data that the majority of the teachers surveyed spend their lunch times in the company of others. The question did not ask teachers to state whether or not they had a lunch duty that required supervising students during that time period. So it's impossible to say whether that is spending time with their peers or spending time with students. The majority just are not eating alone. The majority of teachers surveyed share new ideas with their colleagues. They work past contracted hours and rarely avoid student interaction after dismissal. The majority of teachers feel supported by their schools, and their teachers surveyed feel that their colleagues are caring. Domain 4 assessed the teacher's inner life. Question 29, I find teaching energizing. The average response across survey respondents was sometimes. Question 30, I am patient with myself. The average response was rarely. Question 31, I am patient with others. The average response was sometimes. Between introverts and extroverts, we have another difference on question 29. I find teaching energizing. The average response from introverted teachers was rarely, while the average response from extroverted teachers was sometimes, suggesting that introverts are less likely to find their energy from teaching. Question 32 asked, I am well rested. The average survey response was rarely. Question 33 asked, I have more good days than bad days at work. The average response was sometimes. And question 34, I feel appreciated. The average response, rarely. Between introverts and extroverts, the responses are similar on these three questions. It appears that everyone feels equally exhausted and underappreciated. Questions 35 to 37. I am emotionally exhausted. The average response was sometimes. Question 36. I take the time to practice self-care. On average, rarely. Question 37. I like who I am at school. The average response, sometimes. Between introverts and extroverts, we have another difference on question 35. I am emotionally exhausted. Introverts, on average, stated that they were rarely emotionally exhausted, whereas extroverts responded that they were sometimes emotionally exhausted, suggesting perhaps that introverts are slightly better at conserving their emotional energy. The last three questions on the survey assessed more on a teacher's inner life. Question 38, I become frustrated with students. On average, rarely. Question 39, I check my school email outside of contract hours. On average, sometimes. Question 40, I find humor in classroom life. Average response was sometimes. Between introverts and extroverts, there are no major differences in these three questions. We can conclude from this data that 20% of teachers surveyed rarely find teaching energizing. 30.5% of teachers surveyed experience difficulty being patient with themselves. However, the majority of teachers surveyed are able to be patient with others. And 42.3% of teachers reported not being well rested. The majority of teachers surveyed have more good days than bad days at work. And 71.1% of teachers surveyed only sometimes feel appreciated. 22% of teachers surveyed report always being emotionally exhausted. And 25.4% of teachers surveyed rarely practice self-care. The majority of teachers surveyed reported liking who they are at school. 32.2% of teachers surveyed reported rarely becoming frustrated with students, and 54.24% of teachers surveyed reported checking their school email outside of contract hours. And 62.71% of teachers surveyed reported finding humor in classroom life. What can be learned from the results of this survey? Symptoms of teacher burnout were reported similarly by introverted and extroverted teachers. Both groups of teachers reported feeling similar amounts of exhaustion. Both groups of teachers reported feeling a similar lack of appreciation, and the majority of teachers surveyed are working past their contracted hours. How can the results of this survey influence future practice? In terms of research, the intersection of teacher personality and symptoms of burnout is a rich area for further research. In the future, survey respondents should be screened by Myers-Briggs type indicator so that the data can be disaggregated by individual type. Additionally, it would be intriguing to conduct a similar survey to teachers in the same school and see what data trends emerge. In terms of application, schools and school communities should work together to develop meaningful ways of expressing appreciation to teachers. Schools and school communities should examine teaching schedules and required after-school events to see what changes can be made to minimize teacher exhaustion. And schools and school communities should design initiatives encouraging teachers to practice self-care. I hope that you have found the data points and insights gained from this survey helpful to you as you continue in your teaching career. And based on the results of this survey, I would suggest that you take a nap and do something to take care of yourself, because apparently we're all exhausted and need to take a time out for ourselves. Have an excellent weekend.